Montana Territory, June 1879. The chapel doors slammed open with a roar of wind and fury as Avenlee Ellard lifted her skirts and ran, white lace trailing like a torn flag behind her. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the gasps of the wedding guests or the preacher's startled shout. She did not stop to look back. She would not give him the satisfaction. Barefoot now, veil gone, she tripped down the hill of dry grass behind the little church on the edge of red rock. Her chest ached from more than just the sprint. She had waited for Elias to speak those vows, to take her hand and say yes to the life they had promised each other for 3 years. But instead, he stood stiff at the altar, eyes vacant, and just before the preacher spoke, he turned to her and said, "I cannot." He did not whisper it. He said it plain, so she ran. The road out of town curved west, away from the people who had pitied her. A stagecoach rattled past, but she ducked behind a tree, not ready to be seen. She kept walking. Dust clung to her hem. Her feet bled. Still, she went on. A quarter-mile out, the land opened into wide pasture, and the sound of hooves caught her ears. She whipped around just as the horse came up fast over the ridge. The rider pulled on the reins, slowing the tall bay gelding as he took her in wild hair, torn dress, flushed cheeks. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep, steady. She blinked at him. His hat shadowed his face, but she saw the square jaw, the faint scar on his cheek, the eyes gray like a storm about to break. He looked about 30, dressed in trail-worn denim and a faded brown coat slung over one shoulder. She straightened. "I am not your concern." He dismounted anyway. "You are barefoot, bleeding, and wearing a wedding dress. You look like someone's concern." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The wind tugged at her hair. "I left." "That is all." He studied her a moment, then nodded like he understood more than she said. "Name's Quillan Creed. I got a cabin a few miles west. You are welcome to ride with me till things settle." "I do not need, not asking for anything, just offering a ride. Or you can keep walking till sundown and sleep with the coyotes." That made her pause. He waited, quiet, reins in hand, horse steady between them. She sighed. "Fine, but just until I find my footing." He helped her up with one arm around her waist, lifting her like she weighed nothing. She sat sideways behind the saddle, gripping his coat. The horse moved into a slow trot, and the silence between them stretched, not awkward but calm. "You got a name?" he asked after a while. "Avenlee." "Good name." She did not answer. Her throat was tight. Quillan's cabin sat at the edge of a pine thicket, tucked against a creek. It was small but solid, with a porch and a corral out back. He swung down and helped her dismount, then fetched a basin and clean cloth. "You got any folks nearby?" he asked as he knelt to clean her feet. "No," he looked up. "You married that man back there." She shook her head. "He left me standing at the altar." Quillan paused, cloth in hand. "Then he is a fool." "Thank you," she muttered, unsure why it meant something coming from him. He cleaned the cuts and brought her a pair of his socks. "I will ride into town tomorrow, see what the talk is. You can stay here till you figure out what comes next." She leaned against the porch post. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I know what it is to lose your footing." Those words hung in the air between them. That night he gave her the cot by the fire and took the floor near the door. She heard him shift once, then go still, his breathing deep and even. She stared at the ceiling, unsure if she felt safer or more lost. By morning she had decided both were true. 3 days passed. Avenlee helped in the garden, swept the porch, and cooked biscuits that came out hard but edible. Quillan said nothing about it. He only ate them with a quiet nod. One afternoon, as the sun stretched low, she found him chopping wood by the creek. "Was it your cabin before?" she asked, stepping up beside the stack. He wiped his brow. "Built it after the war, needed a place no one could find me." She watched him lift the axe. His shoulders moved smooth and strong. "You were a soldier, Scout. Union side, lost my older brother in Tennessee. After that, I came west." She nodded slowly. "I am sorry. Me too." Then he said nothing more, and neither did she, but she stayed beside him, the rhythm of the axe strangely soothing. That evening she made stew with the last of his potatoes. They ate on the porch as dusk fell, the sky streaked gold and violet. Avenlee caught herself watching the way his jaw moved when he chewed, the way he glanced at her when he thought she would not notice. "You ever plan to marry?" she asked, voice quiet. Quillan looked at the horizon. "Once. Long time ago, she died before I could ask." Silence settled again. "I did not love Elias," Avenlee said after a moment. "I thought I did, but I think I just wanted to be wanted." Quillan's voice was low. "That man did you a favor walking away." She looked at him. "You think so?" He met her eyes. "I do." The air between them felt different now, charged but still soft. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair off her cheek. She did not flinch. "You are stronger than you know," he said. And for the first time since she ran, she felt like maybe she could believe that. On the 5th day, Quillan returned from town with news. Elias left Red Rock. "Folks say he boarded a train east. No one blames you. Some say you are better off." Avenlee looked out at the field. "I do not think I want to go back." Quillan stepped beside her. "Then do not." She turned to him. "What if I stayed?" His eyes searched hers. "I would like that." Her heart beat faster. "Quillan, yeah, if I stayed." "Would I sleep in the cot forever?" He laughed softly, then reached for her hand. "No, Avenlee, you would not." She smiled, and he leaned in, slow and sure, until their foreheads touched. "I think I am falling for you," she whispered. "I already did," he said. And under the Montana sky, they stood close, two souls who had lost everything, finding something better in each other. The wind had changed during the night. When Avenlee stepped outside at first light, the scent of wet pine hung low in the air, and the sky held that pale, glassy color that meant rain come evening. She carried Quillan's tin mug in one hand, the steam rising in slow curls. His dog, an old heeler with a torn ear and a quiet gait, trailed her out to the porch, then settled beside her boots with a grunt. Inside, Quillan moved with the calm rhythm she'd come to expect. He was oiling his saddle, working the rag in small circles, lips pressed in thought. His brow furrowed just slightly, like he was listening to something inside himself. "I could mend that tear on your shoulder seam," Avenlee offered, "if you have a needle and thread." He looked up. "It's held this long, but if you're offering, I won't say no." She set the mug on the railing. "I like having something to do with my hands." He nodded and pointed her toward a small pine box near the cot. Inside, the needles were sharp and clean, the thread still coiled neat. She took the coat from its hook and sat on the porch rail, knees tucked, her fingers moving with quiet focus. The sound of the creek and the low brushing of saddle leather drifted between them. "You plan to stay through harvest?" he asked after a while, his voice casual. "I haven't thought that far. I could use the help. Got 2 fields to bring in and not enough hands to do it." She looked up. "You trust me not to ruin your crop?" "I trust you more than some of the day laborers who drink their coin by sundown." Avenlee smiled, just a flicker. "Then I'll stay." He gave a soft grunt that might have been approval, then turned back to his work. That afternoon, they rode out to the lower pasture where the soil turned dark and thick near the creek bend. Quillan showed her the rows of young corn, the way the irrigation ran from the slope above, fed by hand-dug channels. His voice was steady, never hurried, and he explained everything once, trusting her to remember. She didn't ask about the carved stone tucked beneath one of the cottonwoods near the fence line, though she noticed he tipped his hat as they passed it. The initials were worn smooth by weather, but she knew better than to pry. Back at the cabin, Avenlee scrubbed her hands raw at the washbasin and rolled up her sleeves past the elbow. Her wrists were marked with faint bruises from the wedding dress pins, but she didn't notice them now. Her arms ached pleasantly from the digging, her legs sore from the ride. Quillan was pulling traps from the shed when she found him. "I can cook something better tonight," she said. "If you have flour and lard. Top shelf in the pantry." "Don't mind the smell of the lard, it's from a wild hog I took last fall." "What about salt?" He grinned slightly. "Buried in the oats bag so the mice don't get to it." That night, they ate in the lean-to behind the cabin while the rain came down soft and steady. She had made biscuits again, but this time they were layered and golden, steaming in the cool air. Quillan broke his in half and passed her the tin of chokecherry preserves without asking. "You always eat out here when it rains?" she asked. "Roof leaks near the stove." "Never got around to fixing it." She tilted her head. "You've had how many years?" "Enough to know the leak doesn't bother me unless I let it." Lightning flashed once, far off beyond the ridge. They watched it in silence. After a long pause, she spoke again. "My mother used to say storms wash things clean, but I think they just show what's been left out too long." Quillan glanced at her, then back at the trees. "Sometimes that's worth knowing." Later, inside, she stitched a patch over the worn spot on his coat's back panel. The fabric was sun-faded, the thread catching slightly on the frayed edge. He sat across from her, carving a length of pine into something smooth and curved. It looked like the beginnings of a ladle. "You always make your own tools?" she asked. "I prefer wood that knows the land." She nodded, not needing more than that. When the fire burned low, she reached for the quilt folded near the hearth and draped it over his shoulders without a word. He didn't move to stop her. Their eyes met for a breath, and something passed between them, not sudden, not sharp, but steady, like a hand resting on the small of her back, guiding, not forcing. She returned to the cot. He stoked the coals once more, then lay back near the door, the quilt pulled to his chin. And in the hush that followed, she let herself believe she had found something more than refuge. She had found beginning. The rain settled into the soil over the next 2 days, the ground drinking deep until the fields steamed in the morning light. Quillan's mule gave him trouble after the storm, refusing the harness, jerking against the bit, so Avenlee offered to walk with him to the south fence where the weight of water had bowed the far posts. "I can hold the line while you reset the brace," she said, pulling her braid through the back of her collar. "You ever set post anchors before?" "No, but I watched my grandfather mend orchard rows in Tennessee. I know how to read a lean." He handed her the fence hammer with no further question. The work was slow, and the clay beneath the churned grass sucked at her boots with every step. She dug with her full weight behind the spade, hands blistering despite the gloves. Quillan didn't tell her to stop. He worked the taut wire with methodical care, pausing only to tighten the loop around each cedar post. When they sat at the edge of the field to rest, she reached for her canteen with cracked lips and red palms. "They used to call me stubborn as a hickory root," she said, flexing her fingers. "I think they meant it kindly." Quillan glanced over. "They weren't wrong." She laughed, short and unpolished. "You don't mind a woman who won't sit quiet?" "I wouldn't know what to do with one who did." They didn't look at each other, but the space between them felt warm, like the sun soaking through damp cotton. Later that evening, while he sharpened the scythe blade near the porch rail, she opened the small carved box she'd carried with her since the morning she fled the chapel. Inside were 2 letters, a thimble and a folded scrap of blue gingham. She held the cloth between her fingers a long while before speaking. "My sister made me this ribbon before she passed. She was 12. Fever took her in a week." Quillan didn't interrupt. He kept the whetstone moving in a slow arc. "I used to think if I kept it close, nothing bad could reach me." "Foolish, I know." "Not foolish," he said, setting the blade aside. "We all carry something we believe keeps the world from swallowing us." She looked over. "What do you carry?" He leaned back against the porch post, arms crossed. "A pocket knife that belonged to my brother, handles cracked. Blade's thin as paper, but I keep it close." She nodded once, then folded the ribbon again and tucked it back inside the box. The next morning, she woke before dawn and found the kettle already warm, steam rising in the hush before first light. Quillan stood at the edge of the pasture, staring out toward the cottonwoods. His shoulders were still, his hat low against the pale sky. She didn't call to him. Instead, she poured 2 mugs and waited until he came back, boots damp from the grass. "You walk that way every morning?" she asked, handing him the tin. "Only when the air feels like it did the day I buried him." He didn't say his brother's name, and she didn't ask. By midday, the sun burned higher than it had in a week, and the air thickened with the scent of pine pitch and wet rock. They worked side by side, stacking the split wood she'd helped him hew the week before. Her arms had learned the rhythm of it, and he let her take the lead without comment. At supper, he passed her the last of the dried peaches, and she gave him the heel of the bread she'd baked that morning, slightly burnt, but soft at the center. "You cook like someone who means it," he said, chewing slowly. "I reckon that's the only way I know how." After they washed up, she lingered by the hearth while he rolled a cigarette with slow fingers. The quiet between them had shifted, no longer just comfort, but something expectant. She could feel it in the way he looked at her longer than he used to. In the way her breath caught when his hand brushed hers near the woodpile. He lit the match, held it to the end of the paper, and inhaled. "Someone came by while I was in town," he said finally. "Asked if a woman in a white dress had passed through, weren't dressed like law. Said he was her cousin." Avenlee stilled, her hand tightening on the edge of the table. "I didn't say much," he added. "Didn't feel right. He's not my cousin, that's Elias's uncle. He used to speak for the family when Elias wouldn't. You want to be found? No, then I won't let them." She met his eyes. "You don't owe me that. I don't do it because I owe you, I do it because I want you here." The words hung there unadorned, unhurried. She stepped forward, slow as if testing ice, and reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers without hesitation. "You sure? I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean." She nodded, and her voice came quieter than she expected. "I want to stay. If you still want me." "I do." And when he leaned down, he kissed her like a promise, not rushed, not desperate, just certain. Outside, the wind picked up again, but the air had no bite to it. They stood together by the fire, the light painting their joined hands in gold. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. The choice had already been made. The wheat ripened faster than Quillan expected. By mid-July, the heads were full and heavy, bowing in the heat. Avenlee had taken to walking the rows in the early hours before the sun cleared the ridge, skirts tucked high and sleeves rolled to the elbow, eyes scanning for signs of rust or blight. She carried a small scythe now, its handle worn smooth by her own hand, shaping into the work. "You've an eye for it," Quillan said one morning as they knelt side by side, clearing a patch of stubborn wild oats near the edge of the field. "Never seen someone learn the land's rhythm so quick." Avenlee brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her glove. "Maybe I just listen harder now. There's something quiet in this soil, like it's waiting to see if I'll stay long enough to earn its trust." He nodded, gaze fixed on the dirt beneath them. "That's not far off." They worked until the sun stood high, then sat in the shade of the wagon shed, sharing a jar of pickled beans and strips of cold venison. She leaned back against the wheel rim, eyes closed, her boots dusty to the laces. "You ever think about what comes after the harvest?" she asked, voice low. "Always." She opened her eyes. "And I take stock, mend what's worn. Patch what I can before the snow. I meant for us." He looked at her fully then, the question not catching him off guard, but settling in like a stone thrown into water. "I think about it more than I say." Avenlee studied the calluses on her palm. "I was raised to believe a woman's future came shaped like a man's house. Now I don't know what shape it takes." Quillan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maybe it takes the shape you give it. Maybe we build something that fits both of us, not just one. You'd want that? I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Later, while she rinsed linens at the creek, a rider passed on the far side of the pasture. She didn't recognize the horse, but the man wore a bowler hat and rode like he had somewhere to be. She watched until he disappeared into the trees. When she came back up the slope, Quillan was waiting with a rifle across his lap. "Got a feeling that man's asking questions," he said. "You think he'll come back?" "I think he'll report to someone who might." She rested a hand on the porch rail. "I don't want to run again. You won't have to." That evening, after the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched long from the barn, he brought her a folded square of linen. Inside was a ring, simple brass, worn smooth. "I made it when I was younger, thought I'd give it to someone once, never did." He held it out. "You don't have to take it now or ever, but I want you to know it's here." Avenlee took it in both hands. "I don't need fine things. I just need something honest." It's honest. She slid it onto her smallest finger where it fit snug. Then I'll wear it. They didn't speak more after that. He touched her cheek once, thumb grazing the edge of her jaw, and she turned into it, eyes closed. The porch around them creaked under the weight of dusk, the air still and warm. Inside, she folded her shawl over the cot and carried her blanket to the side where he kept his books stacked neatly by the hearth. I don't want to sleep apart anymore, she said. Quillan stood, quiet for a moment. Then don't. When she lay beside him, their hands found each other in the dark, fingers twined against the worn cotton of the quilt. There was no need to say more. The decision had already been lived. Outside, crickets began their song, and the cabin settled into the hush of night. Two people breathing the same rhythm, no longer strangers, no longer waiting. The first frost came early. It edged the fence rails in crystal before dawn and left the pumpkins brittle on their vines. Quillan rose before the light broke, the cold stinging his lungs as he stepped outside to draw from the well. In the week since Avenlee had moved her blanket beside his, the rhythm of their days had shifted, unspoken, but certain. He no longer listened for her footsteps in the dark. They were there already, steady as the fire's crackle. He came back in with a bucket half full and set it by the stove. She was at the table, sleeves pushed to her elbows, sorting dried beans into a broad wooden bowl. Cold came quick, he said, hanging his coat on the nail. She didn't pause. The squash will hold if we keep them dry, but the cabbages need to be pulled and stored by tomorrow. I'll cut a trough into the cellar wall. Keep the air moving. She nodded. And for a moment neither of them moved, the quiet not empty but full of the things they now understood without needing to say. By mid-morning they were in the garden, sleeves damp from dew. She worked the spade deep into the soil while he layered pine needles across the root bins near the shed. Her breath clouded before her, and her cheeks flushed from the cold. When she stood to stretch her back, he stepped beside her with a folded cloth. Tie this over your ears, he said, holding it out. She took it with a faint smile. You always this prepared? I've lived through enough winters to know what they take. She tied the cloth behind her head. What do they give? Clarity. If you've made it through spring and summer with someone and still want to look at them when the wind cuts through the cracks, you've got something worth keeping. She looked at him then, full and steady. So far, I still want to look. His reply was quiet. So do I. They stacked the last of the squash by sundown and lit a lantern on the porch. The air was still, the moon rising pale over the trees. She sat beside him on the steps, her knees drawn up, one hand resting against his thigh. I got a letter, she said, not looking at him. He turned to her. From who? A cousin back east. She heard what happened and wrote me through the postmaster. Said Elias's family's gone quiet. No one's asking after me now, no one's looking. Quillan was still. You planning to write her back? I already did. Told her I'm staying. That I've found something different. He didn't speak, just reached for her hand and folded it into his. The next morning she found him in the barn loft, sorting through a cedar chest. He held up a flannel shirt, worn soft at the collar. Was my brother's, he said. Didn't wear it much myself, but it's good fabric. Could be cut down. She stepped forward, running a hand along the hem. You want me to make something from it, if you'd like. I thought maybe a quilt square, something that stays. She nodded, eyes misted. I'd be proud to. By late October, the cellar was full. Jars of beans, rows of baskets packed with straw, ropes of onions hanging from the beams. They sealed the windows tight and patched the gaps in the doorframe with wool she'd cut from an old blanket. One night, as sleet tapped the roof, she leaned against him by the fire, her head on his shoulder. You ever think about putting up a wall to make a second room? She asked, voice low. I did once. Then I thought if I ever had someone to share it with, I wouldn't want to be apart. She smiled against his shirt. Neither would I. He kissed her hair, slow and sure. Then we'll leave the room open. The snow came in November, blanketing the pasture in silence. They spent the days mending, cooking, reading aloud from the old books he'd kept in the cabinet. At night, she curled against him beneath the quilt she was building from old flannel and muslin. his brother's shirt stitched into the center. One evening, after supper, he set a folded sheet of paper on the table. "It's from the land office," he said as she sat down. "I filed it before the snow, wanted the deed in both our names." She touched the edge, eyes wide. "You sure?" "I've never been more," her voice caught. "I never thought I'd belong somewhere again." Quillan reached for her hand. "You belong here, with me," she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from sorrow but the weight of being seen and chosen. "Then I'll stay, for good." They married quietly on the first Sunday after the thaw. No guests, no preacher, just the two of them standing beneath the bare cottonwoods, the wind soft against their coats. He gave her the same brass ring, and she spoke her vows with a voice clear and steady. They returned to the cabin hand in hand, and that night they lit a new fire and opened the pantry for the first jar of summer peaches. She served them over cornbread with cream, and he laughed when she licked the syrup from her thumb. Spring came slow and green, and the fields woke beneath their boots. Together they planted, tended, harvested. He built her a cedar chest for her sewing. She carved his name into the beam above the hearth and hers beside it. Years passed. Children came, a boy with his father's quiet steadiness, and a girl with her mother's fierce will. The days grew full with lessons, chores, laughter. They built a second room after all, not to separate, but to make room for more life. Each night, Quillan sat beside Avenlee as the fire crackled low, her hand in his, the quilt now worn soft from use tucked over their knees. They never spoke of what they ran from, only of what they built. And in that quiet Montana valley, where the creek still whispered and the cottonwoods still bent in the wind, they lived. Together, whole, home.